World War I, 1914 to 1918. World War I erupted like a violent storm, sweeping away a Europe already burdened by arms races and imperial ambition. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in June 1914 was the spark that ignited a long, smoldering powder keg. Within weeks, Europe's great powers split into two camps: Germany and Austria-Hungary on one side, Britain, France, and Russia on the other. Alliances meant to preserve peace, instead, turned a regional crisis into a global war that raged for 4 years and spread to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. It became the first fully industrialized conflict, fought by tens of millions of soldiers using machines of unprecedented power. When the armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918, the world had changed forever. The causes ran far deeper than one assassination. Decades of tension had built up through the naval arms race between Britain and Germany, the web of entangling alliances, and the competition for colonies in Africa and Asia. Rising nationalism within multi-ethnic empires, such as Austria-Hungary, added volatility. Crises in Morocco and the Balkans had already tested the limits of diplomacy. The assassination of the Archduke, followed by Austria-Hungary's harsh ultimatum to Serbia and Germany's backing, turned a regional dispute into a continental war beyond anyone's control. The conflict began with Germany's bold Schlieffen Plan, a rapid strike through neutral Belgium to defeat France before turning east against Russia. Initial advances faltered at the Battle of the Marne, and the Western Front froze into years of trench warfare. Millions of soldiers lived and died in mud under relentless artillery fire. On the Eastern Front, Russia suffered a crushing defeat at Tannenberg, but still forced Germany to divert troops. Between 1915 and 1916, battles of attrition at Verdun and the Somme claimed millions of lives with almost no change in territory. In the Mediterranean, the Gallipoli campaign ended in disaster, while in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire faced Arab revolts. By 1917, revolution forced Russia out of the war, while the United States entered, tipping the balance. Germany's last desperate spring offensive in 1918 failed, and by November, exhausted and isolated, it agreed to an armistice. The cost was staggering: over 9 million soldiers dead, tens of millions wounded, and millions of civilians displaced. 4 great empires, German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman, collapsed. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh terms on Germany: disarmament, territorial losses, and massive reparations. Many historians later argued that the humiliation and resentment it caused helped sow the seeds of future extremism. Meanwhile, Europe's economy was shattered, infrastructure ruined, and the 1918 influenza pandemic killed tens of millions more worldwide. Yet, the war's impact went far beyond destruction. It reshaped global politics and gave rise to new ideologies: communism in Russia, fascism in Italy, and later, Nazism in Germany. Nationalist movements grew in colonial territories as peoples demanded self-determination. The League of Nations was founded to preserve peace, though it proved too weak to prevent future conflict. Socially, the war transformed gender roles. Women entered factories and public life in large numbers, paving the way for expanded rights. But it also produced a lost generation of veterans, haunted by trauma and disillusionment. Culturally, the war left deep scars. Early patriotic fervor gave way to grief and cynicism. Poets such as Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, and novelist Erich Maria Remarque in All Quiet on the Western Front, captured the futility and horror of trench life. Writers like Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and Virginia Woolf, the so-called Lost Generation, reflected the moral and emotional confusion of the post-war world, shaping the modernist movement. The red poppy from John McCrae's poem In Flanders Fields became a lasting symbol of remembrance, and paintings like John Singer Sargent's Gast offered haunting visual testimony to the suffering of modern warfare. Amid tragedy, the war also drove innovation. Tanks, flamethrowers, and radio communication became standard on the battlefield. Americans tested the Kettering bug, a prototype for the drone. Medical advances, motorized ambulances, blood storage, and modern wound care laid the groundwork for future military medicine. The trauma of chemical warfare led to the 1925 Geneva Protocol banning poison gas, one of the first humanitarian milestones of the 20th century. World War I, though an unspeakable tragedy, was a turning point for humanity. It shattered the old order and reshaped politics, society, culture, and science. Above all, it served as a grim reminder of how fragile peace can be and of the price paid when ambition and hatred overtake reason. Sometimes, it only takes a single spark to set the world ablaze, and the greatest danger of all is forgetting the lessons such a war was meant to teach. World War II, 1939 to 1945. World War II erupted in the early hours of the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. The thunder of artillery over Europe signaled the beginning of a new and darker era. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and from that moment, the world was drawn into the deadliest conflict in human history. Over the next 6 years, more than 50 nations across every continent would join the fighting, and between 60 and 80 million people would lose their lives. Among them were 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, a scar that still haunts humanity. The roots of the war stretched back to the bitterness of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, which had imposed harsh and humiliating terms on Germany after its defeat in World War I. That resentment, combined with the Great Depression and the spread of political extremism, created fertile ground for fascism. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power with dreams of restoring imperial glory. In Italy, Mussolini pursued his vision of a new Roman Empire. In Japan, militarists sought dominance across Asia and the Pacific. Meanwhile, the League of Nations, designed to maintain peace, proved powerless to stop aggression. Hitler rebuilt Germany's military, allied with Italy and Japan, annexed Austria, seized Czechoslovakia, and in August 1939 signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, clearing the way to invade Poland without fear of a two-front war. After conquering Poland, Germany unleashed its Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, a new form of warfare, combining tanks, aircraft, and artillery to strike with unprecedented speed. Western Europe fell in a matter of months. France collapsed in 6 weeks, and British forces barely escaped through the chaotic evacuation at Dunkirk. Yet when the bombs rained down on London, the British did not yield. In the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force repelled the Luftwaffe, halting what had seemed an unstoppable German advance. In 1941, Hitler betrayed his Soviet allies and launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. At first, German armies surged forward, capturing vast swaths of territory. But the brutal winter, vast distances, and fierce Soviet resistance turned the tide. At Stalingrad, 2 million lives were lost in the bloodiest battle ever fought, marking the beginning of Germany's downfall. That same year, across the Pacific, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, destroying much of America's Pacific Fleet. The strike drew the United States into the war, transforming a regional conflict into a truly global struggle. The Pacific became a theater of ferocious battles. Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, where every island was fought over at immense human cost. In Europe, 1944 saw the Allies launch the D-Day landings in Normandy, one of the largest military operations in history, signaling the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi control. By April 1945, Berlin lay in ruins. Hitler committed suicide in his bunker, and Germany surrendered unconditionally. But in Asia, Japan refused to yield. In August, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, producing towering mushroom clouds, symbols of both victory and unimaginable horror. Over 200,000 people died within moments. On the 2nd of September 1945, Japan formally surrendered, bringing 6 years of global warfare to an end. The aftermath was catastrophic. More than 60 million dead, tens of millions wounded, and entire cities, Berlin, Warsaw, Tokyo, reduced to ashes. Germany was divided, Japan occupied, and two new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged, setting the stage for the Cold War. Yet, from the ruins, a new world order began to take shape. The United Nations was founded in 1945, the hope of preserving peace. The weakened European empires spurred independence movements across Asia and Africa, ushering in an age of decolonization. Culturally and scientifically, the war left profound legacies. It inspired a wave of films, books, and music reflecting the suffering, sacrifice, and courage of ordinary people. The demands of war had accelerated innovation radar. Early computers like ENIAC, mass production of penicillin, and rocket technology, breakthroughs that would shape the modern technological era. World War II, then, was not only a blood-soaked tragedy of the 20th century, but also a turning point that reshaped the entire world. It ended the age of empires, introduced the bipolar order of superpowers, and gave birth to dozens of new nations. Above all, it stands as a stark reminder that peace is never guaranteed. It is earned through sacrifice, vigilance, and the lessons that must never be forgotten. And one can't help but wonder, if humanity were ever to forget those lessons, could history repeat itself once again? American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. The American Civil War, fought from 1861 to 1865, was the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history. A war that not only determined the fate of more than 30 million people, but also tested a defining question. Could the United States survive its own division? With more than 1 million dead and wounded, those 4 years of fire and anguish left scars not just on bodies, but on the nation's soul and social fabric. The roots of the war lay in deep economic, moral, and social differences between North and South. The industrial North pursued modernization through manufacturing and commerce, while the agrarian South relied on plantation farming sustained by enslaved labor. Southerners feared that the federal government, led by President Abraham Lincoln, would move to abolish slavery, the cornerstone of their economy. When Lincoln was elected in 1860-11, Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America, plunging the nation toward disunion. In April 1861, Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter, marking the war's beginning. Both sides initially believed victory would come quickly, but reality proved far harsher. The conflict stretched into a brutal series of battles. Antietam, Shiloh, Bull Run, and Vicksburg fought across the continent. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in rebel territories free. The war's purpose thus evolved from preserving the Union to a fight for human freedom. That same year, the Battle of Gettysburg, the war's bloodiest and most decisive clash, turned the tide in favor of the Union. General William Tecumseh Sherman's later march through the South destroyed Confederate infrastructure and morale, hastening collapse. In April 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, ending the Civil War. Victory, however, came at a staggering cost. Over 620,000 soldiers perished, hundreds of thousands were maimed, and the Southern economy lay in ruins. Yet, from the ashes emerged a new America. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery nationwide. The 14th and 15th Amendments later granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans, hard-won advances that would take generations to fully realize. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to help former slaves rebuild their lives, offering education, land assistance, and legal support, an unprecedented humanitarian effort in U.S. history. But Reconstruction was fraught with tension. The South was occupied, freed people faced violence and systemic discrimination, and extremist groups like the Ku Klux Klan terrorized black citizens. Jim Crow laws soon entrenched racial segregation, undermining the promise of equality. It would take another century of civil rights struggle to move closer to the ideals born from the war. The Civil War's greatest lesson endures. When deep social injustices are ignored, they can erupt into catastrophe, and only genuine reform can bring lasting justice. The war also marked the dawn of modern warfare. Technological innovation transformed the battlefield. Rifled muskets and mini-A bullets made combat deadlier than ever. Repeating rifles increased firing speed. Ironclads and the first submarines, like the CSS Hunley, revolutionized naval warfare. Telegraph lines allowed Lincoln to direct strategy from Washington, while photography captured hauntingly real images of destruction. Railroads became lifelines for troop and supply movement, creating a logistical network unlike anything seen before. Culturally, the Civil War left a vast legacy. Songs such as the Battle Hymn of the Republic and Dixie became enduring reflections of pride and loss on both sides. Decades later, Gone with the Wind romanticized the Old South's vanished world, evoking the tension between honor, freedom, and devastation. The American Civil War did not end simply with Lee's surrender at Appomattox. It ended with the rebirth of a nation. From division and ruin, the United States emerged no longer a fragile confederation of states, but a unified country bound by a promise of liberty. The price was immense blood, tears, and countless lives resting beneath the soil of thousands of battlefields. Yet out of that pain came renewal, and the enduring truth that a nation's strength lies in its capacity to heal its own wounds. The Civil War did not just define America's past, it shaped its future.